Author Chris Sutton returns to the podcast. He is here to talk about his latest book, Sparks, 1969 to 1979. Every album, every song. It is part of Sonicbond's On Track series. Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be back, Eric, yet again for number 5, I think.
Number 5.
Yeah.
So what do we have? We have 2 Alice Coopers, who was one in the 70s, one in the 80s.
Yeah, Sabbath in the 70s, AC/DC, every song, every album, and now we're back for Sparks, 69 to 79.
This is interesting for me because I didn't know about this group, Sparks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an introduction for me. So these books are great for, I think, all types of fans, including myself, who aren't aware of a group, get to learn about them, listen to them, and I really enjoy their music. There's one particular album I'm a fan of now. I'll let you know as we go through these. But
yeah,
tell me about, like, when did you become a fan of this group? When did you discover them?
Well, I can remember the day, I can remember the minutes, the second, the moment, and what it was back in 1974 in Britain. The only music programmes on were Top of the Pops, which was on a Thursday night, and the Old Grey Whistle Test, which was a late night programme. And you had to kind of watch what your parents watched, but everybody watched Top of the Pops. That was the weekly half-hour slot of music. And you got everything. You couldn't fast forward or rewind, you watched it live. And you had all sorts of bands. Some were good, some were terrible, but you put up with it. But Sparks came on the 9th of May, 1974, and it was explosive. I mean, with this town ain't big enough for the both of it. It was just like a jaw-dropping. What was that? I know the apocryphal story, probably true, is John Lennon had them recorded the shows and sent to him in America when he was living. And he apparently rang Ringo Starr and said, you want to see Top of the Pops? They've got Mark Bolan on with Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, the mustache.
Yeah, and this is the thing. You got Russell Mael's falsetto in his hair and preening at the camera. Ron Mael's sort of Darth Vader death stare, and his sort of Chaplin-esque looks, maybe perhaps, in the moustache. And it was just like, it was like watching a complete film score in about 4 minutes. It just came at you like an onslaught, and you thought, what was that? And I'm not joking, next day, everybody I knew who was into music, everybody was talking about that performance.
Wow.
That song. It was that big. I mean, they could have been like quirky one-hit wonders. It was that kind of vibe, perhaps, really. But they there was more to them than that, and they did manage to carve out, as we know, a long career out of it.
Yeah, huge in the UK, and then right up until recently, they had this huge resurgence of interest. But yet, here's a group from Los Angeles. Give us the backstory. They start out as a 5-piece, and then dwindle down to the 2 guys, the 2 brothers, Russell and Ron.
Well, they grew up in the Pacific Palisades area in Los Angeles. I'm talking like I know the area, but I don't. You might. I don't know.
Somewhat familiar with it, never been there, but yeah.
Art school students, Ron and Russell Mael, the 2 brothers, at the heart of Sparks all through the decades. And they met up with a guy named Earl Mankey, who you may know as a producer engineer with the Runaways, the Beach Boys in later times. And he was a bit of a sort of a tech boffin and the recordings and so on. So they did a demo album of music with Earl Mankey, the 3 of them. Also appearing on the demo album were a guy called John Mendelsohn, who you might know as a rock critic.
Yep, absolutely know the name.
And a guy called Ralph Oswald. He played some bass on that demo album. They did, I think it was 100 copies, packaged it up in boxes and sent them around to various people they thought might be interested. And a guy who eventually heard their recordings was one Todd Rundgren. Probably influenced by the fact that his girlfriend at the time was, shall we say, a close friend of Russell's, as it turns out. And he ended up getting them signed to Bearsville Records after the demo album, which was in '69, which is why the book, I couldn't leave that demo album out. It was a gem which turned up in fan circles about 25 years ago. It was rumoured to exist, but then it finally turned up and caused a bit of a stir amongst all those of us who love the original band.
In '71, the first official album was released. Little interest, very low sales. It's not even under the Sparks name. at least not at first, right?
Well, the name, they were called Half Nelson, which is a wrestling hold, for anyone who doesn't know. By this time, Ron and Russell and Earl had been joined by Earl's brother James Mankey, who you might know later from Concrete Blonde, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he joined on bass and also played guitar. And a real powerhouse drummer, Harley Feinstein, a terrific drummer. And Rundgren produces the first album for Bearwood and for Bearsville, sorry, Records, and it does nothing, as you've said. But it's a fabulous album full of unusual, witty songs about things that nobody else was really writing songs about at all. You know, so then the idea came that perhaps the name was a problem. So the band was then changed. It was going to be Sparks Brothers, but they thought that was a bit too like Marx Brothers, and it became just Sparks. And the album was reissued with a completely different cover, possibly a better cover. It's the one of them standing against the brick wall, looking like mean and moody. But I do love that first album very much, Eric. I still think it stands up today.
How would you describe the sound of Sparks?
I think we would say it's very British, perhaps. I don't think there was anybody else. Thaddeus James Lowe, who engineered the album, he couldn't think of anybody else around that time who sounded like that. And I think it's a band who's trying to try lots of different things, different sounds, different songs, and are just there doesn't seem to be almost an influence on what they're doing. It just is Sparks. Um, the songs,
It's early alternative, I would say, early new wave, maybe a little.
yeah.
I think of They Might Be Giants as a band, like they're a little quirky. The lyrics are not mainstream type
No,
lyrics.
good God, no, no.
Yeah,
That is the thing, Eric, on that first album is that you put it on and you constantly think, well, what is this? What's going on now? I mean, Biology 2, which is Earl Mankey's song about chromosomes and a gene pool and so on, is still one of the most bizarre things I've heard on a record in my life. There's some interesting tracks on there. The Fletcher on Her Armour, which is about a man who's dying and passing away, and almost gets to attend his own funeral before it happens because he hasn't quite gone. Uh, it's just such an unusual album. I would recommend it to anybody who likes things that are a bit quirky and a bit different. But of course, I don't know how it goes. I'm assuming that fundamentally, that if you're an arty kind of unusual band, then you've got a fair chance in New York and Los Angeles, perhaps, which is where Sparks are probably biggest in America.
Todd Rundgren almost produced this '73 album, "A Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing," which features some key songs from the Sparks catalog, which you mention in each album throughout the book. On this one, "Girl from Germany," "Moon Over Kentucky," "Do Re Mi," and "Whippings and Apologies." James Lowe produces this one. This album for you is a masterpiece. You credit a lot of this to the fact that the band had been gigging a lot.
Well, it's really interesting. The first album, as I say, is quite quirky and off the wall, and it's great. But from the first 5-10 seconds of "Girl from Germany" that opens "Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing," you can tell it's a band that's been a bit more drilled, and is a band. I think they just sound so more rocky. It's hard to, more of a band vibe perhaps than they originally had. And James Lowe was a joy to interview. That's one of his favourite albums still. So the two of us were there talking for an hour. Why isn't this album amongst one of the best known albums in the world? For those who don't know, the woofer is a bass and a tweeter is a treble. So it's a bass in treble's clothing is where they got that from. But again, the songs are actually more lyrically more obscure, I think, than they were on the first album. The Louvre is about a statue in the Louvre, which is actually got a real person inside it. So you're looking at this stone statue, but there's a real person looking back at you who can't get out. Moon Over Kentucky's, to me, almost like a prequel drama to This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. And that's a phenomenal track as well. And I've got to say, I'll hand on heart, I love their Amphetamine sort of cover of Do Re Mi. I mean, when they lock into that groove at the end, Harley and Jim on bass and drums, I never think they're going to make it to the end of the song. Such is the frantic pace of it. But it's still one of my favourite albums ever, Woofer in Tweeter's Clothing.
Yeah, but they did get the commercial success. The next album, 1974, this is where they are catapulted to huge success thanks to the single "This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us." Other songs of note: from this second album, Amateur Hour, Falling in Love with Myself Again, and Talent is an Asset. And this is the album Kimono My House.
Yeah,
That's the second album. Yeah.
that's
Under Island Records, though, this was a difficult decision for the brothers to make,
well,
right?
yeah. Well, the first two albums had bombed, to put it mildly. They had toured, played gigs in Britain and Europe in 1972 at the end of the year. They managed to somehow get the money out of Bearsville to go over to Britain. And they did the Old Grey Whistle test, where Bob Harris, the presenter, didn't reckon much to them. But having gone back to Los Angeles to regroup, I suspect that there would already been some feelers maybe put out for them to come over to Britain. And Ron and Russell came over. Muff Winwood, who was in the Spencer Davis group and was at A&R at Island Records and was in production, he told me that there was never anything on the table about the rest of the band coming to Ireland, just Ron and Russell. But there is this postcard which James Lowe dug out for me, which is in the book, where Ron does say that we're attempting to get the other three guys, Jim and Earl Mankey and Harley Feinstein, on the deal with Ireland. And if it doesn't work, we'll pick up some British musicians. But from that point on, effectively, Sparks is the two Americans, Ron and Russell, and three British guys. What is curious here is Martin Gordon, who's the bass player on Kimono My House. He felt he was joining a band, to all intents and purposes, a band. And what in effect it was Sparks was effectively Ron and Russell Mael with three backing musicians. That's what becomes clear. It's not a band in, say, in the Van Halen sort of way. I know you're a fan of them. It's not in that way at all. So it's very much their kind of their bag, really. And Kimono My House, the title is a pun on the Rosemary Clooney song "Come On to My House," which you may have heard of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's where that comes from.
Okay.
But you've got, it's interesting, this fantastically brave cover where you've got the two geisha girls on the cover. Not a mention of the album title, not a mention of the band, not a picture of the band or the males at all on the front cover. You go into the shop and you see that lime green kind of cover with the geisha girls, and it just draws you. You know, what's that? What's that album? And the single as well, coming before the album. And my God, that didn't half drum up some sales for the album.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that one. Yeah, very intricate in its structure. A lot of things happening, yet it all comes together so well. It's like Bohemian Rhapsody, very much like that. Talk about that. Oh, also, there's Elton John, Bernie Taupin. That's important to know because they influence the decision to release it as a single. They didn't even want to release it as a single.
Well, we all know how singles go and how it's supposed to work. And then occasionally something will come through over in Britain, maybe not in America. Something like Kate Bush's Wuthering Heights, goes to number one and becomes an enormous single when many other times it wouldn't. Well, this town ain't big enough, certainly. You can see why Muff Winwood's thinking an intense production, a lot of tracks used to record it, gunshot sounds as well. And then he gets to that point where he's thinking, hang on, we're going to put this out and try and ship this and make it a big hit and sell the album. Is this actually really a single, with a chorus and verses and so on? Elton John and Bernie Taupin were over at his house and he said, what do you think? And they reckoned it would be an enormous hit. Sparks themselves, in terms of reference points by now, you can see that bands, perhaps it's been suggested, like bands like Queen might have been listening to those high-pitched harmony vocals and the operatic nature of the song and the structure, which is quite complicated. The other thing is Ron Mael has swapped his keyboard as well. He plays the Farfisa on the first two albums. On this album, he's playing an RMI piano, electric piano, and he's also using, I think it's an Echoplex on it. So that's why you get that slightly wobbly, almost shimmery sound on the intro. And if any of the listeners, for some reason, haven't heard this Town Ain't Big Enough, you play that intro, and I think instantly it hooks you in Ron Mael's piano line.
Yeah, and people can listen to the song as well as the songs that we're talking about in this episode, and a lot of the songs that you highlight throughout the book. I put together a playlist, so you can go to the show notes, click the link, and there's a Spotify playlist there. Yeah, that song was within the top 10 in the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the UK. Reached number 2 actually in the UK. Stayed there for 2 weeks, so that's become their highest charting song on the UK singles chart. The follow-up album is 1974's Propaganda. Key songs: Propaganda into At Home, At Work, At Play, Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth, Don't Leave Me Alone with Her. What a great album cover. The Mael brothers kidnapped and spirited away on a speedboat, but there was another idea for a cover.
Yeah, I mean, they actually do look scared, don't they, on the cover? I mean,
They
that looks
do.
very, 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 very genuine. The cover of the
Yeah, that's an actual photo. That's not trickery, any photo trickery, no green screen, none of that
No,
stuff.
we didn't have that sort of trickery back then at all. I mean, the original
Yeah.
plan was, I think, was I don't actually understand what is going on with this, and I tried to get to the bottom of this with the band, but they didn't understand either. I mean, the album's called Propaganda, and clearly this is about being kidnapped and so on and so forth. And the original plan was them to jump out of an aeroplane for the cover, and they would have had to do that for real, as you're saying now. It would have just been photoshopped, wouldn't it, with them looking scared about 2 feet off the ground? But they would have had to jump out the plane for that cover. Instead, they end up on the back of a speedboat doing what looks like 100 miles an hour on a cold day around Bournemouth or somewhere, you know.
Right, and hands and feet
Yeah, you
bound.
can see that.
They got a gag over their
Yeah,
mouth, and they look like they're freaking
they do.
out. It's almost like a scene out of a James Bond
Yeah,
film.
they do. I mean, in effect, Propaganda. Not to not to sound like I'm putting it down. It is almost a part two of Kimono My House, and the two albums are actually being re-released in a package called 1974 in about a month's time. So they're being lumped together on that. What is extraordinary is Ron Mael does have some songs he could have used. He doesn't use any of them that he definitely had in his locker that were left over from Kimono. He manages to write a whole new album, in effect, in 5 months or so, and record it. I mean, those days were just incredible for bands that were out on tour and recording at that pace, that speed.
They were, as I say, a critic's darling. Critics seem to enjoy these albums,
They did.
or at least this one here that's got some great
Yeah, I
reviews.
mean, they did get great reviews, and they were enormous in Britain at this point in '74, and in Holland and Germany and France. They started to get over to America and doing some of the shows that you have over there. But I think America is a real tough place to break, and again, I would imagine there are swathes of the country that wouldn't necessarily want what they were offering.
And there is trouble behind the scenes during this
Yeah.
time, 1974. Talk about that. Bassist Martin Gordon was fired.
Well, yeah, he thought he was in a band to all intents and purposes. If you look at the back cover of Kimono, you see a big picture of Ron and Russell Mael, and the band are down the side in smaller pictures. There was an original band picture taken of them all in the spotlight, which he's got a copy of, and that wasn't used. Um, I don't think Ron and Russell Mael ever thought of it as being a band in that sense, ever. Ron writes all the songs with Russell chipping in. Martin could have written songs. He started, as he puts it, I think, trying to put his points of view forward, and his points of view weren't necessarily coalescing with what the Mael's view was, so he got fired. Peter Oxendale, who was going to come in on the tour on keyboards, was then fired, he says, for being Martin Gordon's friend. So it's a bit tricky. Muff Winwood was quite good about this. His view was these things happen in music, so what? Bands change, people leave, it's their career. And I can see both sides' point of view on this. But by the end of Propaganda, Adrian Fisher on lead guitar, who is stunning on both Kimono My House and Propaganda, terrific lead guitarist, he has also gone as well. Ian Hampton comes in on bass. And then the Maels opt for a change after Propaganda. I think they could see that things were looking perhaps a little bit tricky for them. They felt like they needed to ring the changes a little after Propaganda.
Author Chris Sutton is our guest to talk about his latest book, Sparks, 1969 to 1979. Every album, every song. 1975's Indiscreet. The Maels go with Tony Visconti to produce the album. He worked with T-Rex, David Bowie, among others. Hospitality on Parade, Looks, Under the Table with Her, key tracks on this one. But the album doesn't do well. Not as much as they'd hoped in America. There isn't much interest outside of LA and New York. Why do you think that was?
The album is quite a mixed bag. I would say it's certainly more diverse than the previous two for Ireland, than Kimono and Propaganda. Interestingly, Tony Visconti records a lovely version of a song called "Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth," one of the first eco songs I can think of. And he records a version with his wife Mary Hopkin, who is a folk singer, and she's on backing vocals on the Indiscreet album. Well, what they do on Indiscreet is Visconti's just a superb arranger, great musician as well, plays bass, recorder, and so on and things. And so you get that there's a big band song on it, Looks, Looks, Looks. Ron Mael doesn't even play on it. None of the band play on it. There's only Russell on it with the Ted Heath Orchestra, who were a famous orchestra going back decades in Britain. And it's an authentic big band track. Then you get a song done with like a string quartet and lots of different sounds going on. And it's partly a kind of band album, as say Propaganda was, and partly a whole different tangents musically. So it comes together as a bit of a mixed bag, a very enjoyable mixed bag. I think if you're already a signed up hardcore fan, you can kind of get into that. But I think casual listeners, not really, no.
Another interesting cover too. Eye catcher. It looks like they both were in the plane that crashes in a rural neighborhood, and they're on the street outside of a house.
Yeah, the idea I think is Ron has come out of the house.
Okay.
He's been working
Okay.
on the house or the drive or something, and he's found this light aircraft crashed with a very happy looking Russell Mael sat alongside it. It doesn't look too bad at all. And of
He's the
course,
one that was in the plane.
yeah, and of course it's very indiscreet, this plane crash. The backdrop is actually is a backdrop. It's not actually a real street. It's one of those Hollywood kind of things that they use. Yeah, it's an album I do like Indiscreet. I like a lot of it, but when you play it, you are aware that it's extraordinarily diverse.
Is it on this album that there's the Beatles cover, or is that the next one? I Want to Hold Your Hand.
The Beatles cover, yes, that's an interesting long story to come to the
Yeah,
Beatles cover.
that's on the it was on the Island Masters bonus tracks version. I don't know if it was on the original pressing of the album, was it?
Well, what happens is after Indiscreet, which had seen their grip slipping in Britain and Europe, the chart placings are lower. So it's what did they do now? So the males opt to go back to Los Angeles. The British band is let go, to use the term, and there they are in Los Angeles. And somewhat surprisingly, the first thing they do is to meet up with Earl Mankey and recorded one song with him, which for hardcore Sparks fans of the original albums is a joy, called England. And it sounds exactly like an outtake from Woofer into Eater's Clothing or the first Sparks album. And it's just a sheer joy to hear Mankey's sort of jangly guitar and those tones again. And then comes this strange idea to record a single cover version with Marianne Faithfull of I Want to Hold Your Hand, done in a big sort of band style, like a Broadway style. And
Slowed down,
yeah,
turned into a ballad. Yeah.
it's awful.
Oh, well, I was going to say, quote unquote, awfully syrupy, as you wrote
I,
in the
I,
book.
I remember the first time I heard it, and I thought, "What on earth is this?" And believe me, Eric, I've tried for decades to like this, and it's very difficult to interview the man who produced it, Rupert Holmes, and not say, "Look, I think this is awful." I don't think he'd mind actually, but Marianne Faithfull walks away from it. So Russell sings it on his own in this Broadway style with a band. No Ron. And Rupert Holmes delivers this single, which predictably doesn't do anything at all. And then sparks up for a complete gear change. You'll notice this is becoming quite a regular theme of a change. And there's rumbles of something interesting happening in New York around 1976, as you probably are aware. There's new bands popping up with attitude, a bit of punk about them, and the males opt to go to New York and start again and do their next album there, which is the one which I'm betting is your favourite, which is Big Beat.
Bingo. Big beat. Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. Yeah, because this is packed with some harder edged rock songs. I really like this album. After almost getting David Bowie guitarist Mick Ronson to produce it, they get, as you said, Rupert Holmes of Pina Colada Escape fame. If you like pina colada, yeah, he produces this.
I interviewed a lot of people for the books, and these people were all lovely, witty, some of the best people I've ever interviewed. And one of at the top, Rupert Holmes, was such a gentleman. He talked to me for a couple of hours about this album.
Wow, that's awesome.
I mean, the guy is a legend, and they were in a mess, really. I mean, Mick Ronson manages to he goes and does the Bob Dylan Rolling Thunder review tour and can't do the Big Beat album or the tour. So they're left with Sal Maida, who they've picked up, a bass player who'd been with Roxy Music and various other bands. They've got a guy called Hilly Michaels on drums. And it's a guy who Maida knows, a guy called Jeffrey Salen, who played in Tough Darts. And Jeffrey Salen agrees to play guitar on the album. Now, what happens is Rupert Holmes has to deliver this album in next to no time at all. The cover was already had been shot. He was asked to do a sequencing for the album before they'd actually really recorded it. So we had to do a finished sequence of an album that they were still trying to record. They told him they wanted it to be kind of tougher, louder, a big beat. And he said, if that's what you want, that's what I'm going to give you. And I don't know what you thought about this, Eric. When you put it on, it must have been quite a shock for you if you were working through these albums and having a bit of a listen, that suddenly you get this loud drums and guitar coming at you.
It definitely was. It wasn't something I was expecting. I was pleasantly surprised. But as I go through each of the tracks, I'm waiting for myself to maybe say, this one I don't like, this one I don't like, maybe this one's more like previous to. But I liked all the tracks on the album as you go through it. Great production, great sound, guitars. Yeah, this is definitely surprised. Wasn't expecting this. Yeah, Big Boy, Nothing to Do. I bought the Mississippi River. Great songs.
Well, that one, Mississippi River, you can tell sounds like an older Sparks song of, say, Indiscreet or Propaganda that's been kind of toughened up a bit. It has that similar vibe to it. But do you notice that Ron Mael is right down in the mix? Yeah. His keyboards are almost not there on most of the tracks. You can hear him if you try, but Jeff Salen, my God, he run.
I was going to say credit to him, man, on guitar. Great guitar work. Jeff Salen.
The man runs riot, absolutely riot on that album.
Yeah, Hilly Michaels on drums, Sal, I think it's pronounced Maida.
Yeah, Maida, yeah.
On bass. But the album bombed. That shocks me.
They did tour. They toured with the Patti Smith group, and there are two kind of good, really good live recordings out there on YouTube worth listening to. And the band really cooked. They really, really did. Astonishingly good band that they had.
Well, I think they were, and I think the label was trying because they put them in the movie Roller Coaster, get some notice there. They're the band performing in the theme park of that movie, by the way. But
that's right.
One of the last dates they played in LA features an opening band by the name of Van Halen.
Yeah, what happened to them?
I don't know. I don't know if they ever made it. They opened.
Yeah.
They opened for Sparks.
Yeah, that's right. That? Yeah, I know. I can't quite believe it's true, but they were so adamant that this had happened, that Van Halen had played there, and Eddie Van Halen was so grateful. But I've never heard that come from a Van Halen fan, that this happened.
Yeah, that new book by Alex Van Halen, by the way, I urge everyone to go out and buy it. It's a great book about those early days. He does talk about those early days, what it was like opening up, playing clubs, playing backyard parties.
But does he mention playing with Sparks? Does he mention
He
Sparks?
Does not mention
Sparks. No.
I'm sure he does. How about that? Yeah, we opened for this one band that was just amazing, Sparks. No, he didn't. But yeah, that album bombed. Why do you think?
I think that one of the things with Sparks, which for anyone who isn't aware of them, you kind of buy into the band and you're in for the ride. And when these tangents come along, you go, yeah, okay. Yeah, this is what Sparks do. This is how they are. But for casual listeners, I think it's difficult to plug into that. Even as a British fan, when I got it, because we had no warning back in those days. You didn't know what the album was going to sound like. You just put it on, and you're like, oh, okay. Oh, this is what we're doing now then. I think they didn't tour all of America, and they didn't even tour Britain at all or Europe whatsoever. There was no funding for them to go and tour in the usual places where they would have gone down well. I think with that album, could have been more successful if it had been promoted.
I wouldn't be surprised if people thought they were a brand new band.
I would imagine in America
Yeah.
they would do. I don't think the cover helps, to be fair. I think that kind of street punky, loud vibe they're going. I don't think the cover is the right one for what they were trying to do at
The
that
black
point.
and white one, right? They're both on the cover, black and white, and one of the guys is bare chested.
That's Ron in the shirt and tie, and Russell's the bare chested one.
Columbia and possibly the Miles decided great ideas to get top class musicians to back the band on the next album, 1977's Introducing Sparks, a baffling title. We just talked about there were people that thought they were brand new. I don't know, maybe that's what they were thinking, but that did baffle you and your fellow Sparks fans in the UK.
Well, I think they thought it was ironic, but it was certainly baffling. And Columbia's idea, and you can see what the thought process is. I'm guessing is you've got these guys. What if we put them with top flight session musicians, give them all that arrangement power and so on, and sort of mainstream it a bit? Then maybe that might pick up sales by making them a little bit more accessible, a bit more normal, if that's the right word to use.
Yeah, not the best album cover either. Looks like Barry Manilow on the cover.
Oh dear God.
Ron on the cover, Russell on the back, and they're doing the same pose. They're kind of looking at you with a blank stare.
It's a shockingly bad cover. It's
Like
a
they're heading
shockingly
to the
bad cover.
disco club.
Now, Ron and Russell have generally never been kind about this album, it's fair to say. Rupert Holmes, going back, he always felt that if anybody said that Big Beat to them was a great album, they'd go, oh yeah, fantastic. Whereas if somebody said to them, don't like Big Beat much, they go, oh, that was the producer's fault. That was his kind of...
Yeah.
When you look at the guys who are playing on Introducing Sparks, I mean, this is like an A-list of session musicians.
Right.
You've got
Tom Rotella on lead guitar.
Oh my God! Now we had Jeff Salen last time. This time we have Tom Rotella. He plays one of my all-time favorite guitar solos. Is on this album.
Goofing off.
Right. I mean, even Russell Mael admitted that was an extraordinary piece of work that he plays. When they did their 21 albums in 21 nights sort of thing, residency in London. When they were did that, on the last show, one of the highlights of the last shows was this version of Goofing Off. And I remember having an extraordinarily happy time at the front, leaping around with all these people to that terrific song, Goofing Off, which is about the drudgery of the working week and then the release at the weekend. So the drudgery of the working week is in the slow kind of verses. And then it lets fly and the chorus for the weekend.
That one, Forever Young, These Mysteries. Great tracks on there.
There is some good tracks on there. I don't think Ronnie's on it as much as perhaps he might be. There's 2 or 3 keyboard players credited, and it's a little bit diluted, but there are some great songs on there that get through that. Goofing Off is one. Occupation always makes me laugh, where it covers all the various occupations that people might have. Ladies is quite amusing. Those Mysteries is a good song. So there is some good stuff on there, definitely. Again, I think let down by the appallingly bad cover.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I'm sure they saw this coming. They tried to stop it, but I'm sure they weren't shocked. They were dropped by Columbia after the failure of Introducing Sparks. 1978, tough year for the brothers. This is where Italian composer and producer Giorgio Moroder enters the story. He produces, he did produce singles for Donna Summer during the mid to late 70s disco era. He produced Love to Love You Baby, I Feel Love, Last Dance, all those great hits. He just started a career composing soundtracks, did Midnight Express, American Gigolo, Superman 3, Scarface. So he's a big name. You write, quote, the extent of Moroder's influence has never been clearly established, but there are plenty of clues that it was considerable. So talk about what he does with the songs on this album and some of the technical challenges he had too making it. Number One in Heaven, right?
Yeah, you have to give the guys real credit here. Having been let go and finished with introducing Sparks, they came up with a lot of demos. Some of which are known as the Arista demos, which was probably the consignment that Arista Records got and somebody leaked out into fan circles and whatever. And those songs all sound quite like introducing Sparks, really, those similar sort of songs. Um, Moroder agreed to work with them, and he will have been famous to all your listeners for his work, predominantly with Donna Summer, I would say. That's I Feel Love and so on. And the Maels were extremely big fans of his work with Donna Summer, particularly. So what Moroder was bringing to the table would have been a synth kind of heavy loops kind of sequences kind of style, which they felt would be an interesting dynamic to see how Ron and Russell would fit into that world. The brilliance, I think, of Moroder is using his regular drummer, Keith Forsey, who plays, like a real drum kit. So you've got all these sequences and all these loops and all these synths going on. And in the heart of that, you've got this guy who's literally battering his kit. And I think that really helps give it an organic heart to the sound. It really, really does. Virgin Records, who have got a real reputation over in Britain for breaking new ground, they give lots of acts a chance, and they were putting out a lot of very diverse output. It landed on their desk, and they signed up Sparks for the Number One in Heaven album, which had already been recorded. And it did extremely well in the UK. There was an initial little bit of a backlash to it having a kind of a disco sound to it. For a long time, Sparks fans, you were kind of thinking, oh, now we're going down the kind of a disco-y route to the sound. But there are three of Sparks' biggest songs of all time are on there. Number One in Heaven, Beat the Clock, Tryouts for the Human Race would be the big three.
That album, Number One in Heaven, it did put him back on the map. So it was a good move for them to get in Giorgio Moroder for that album. 3 big singles, number 1 song in Heaven, number 14 in the UK, Beat the Clock went top 10 in the UK, Tryouts for the Human Race, number 45. Andy Warhol almost ended up on the song Beat the Clock.
Yeah, they couldn't afford him.
That's right. They couldn't afford him. That was funny. But the album did do well. So put him back on the map, right?
It did. I mean, Virgin were past masters back in the late 70s of lots of different coloured vinyls, picture discs, different packaging, 12, anything that would get the sales up for records. And they did the works on Sparks, and it really did get them up. You saw them back on top of the pops, and they hadn't been on there for a considerable, like 5 years or so. And here they were again. Okay, Ron's hair's now a bit curly, perhaps, but it's still recognisably Sparks. And once you get past the kind of I remember some fans at the time didn't like the disco-y feel. That was a bit of a stretch because disco wasn't thought of as being, like a quality musical form by a lot of people back in the late 70s. So they weren't like the next book much either.
Talk about their new look, though, Chris. Talk about that, because you say there have been a fair few acts who owe a debt to the Maels for inventing a new look.
Yeah, I think the sound was the big thing. Was that they were embracing kind of the disco form and playing around with it. Now, what they got was the two of them now on top of the pops with a session drummer, David Kenrick, who's come on and he's drumming with them. And then years later, as Russell Mael actually predicts, we start to see people like Pet Shop Boys, and Erasure, who very clearly, it seems, that they've just adopted the kind of the Sparks form from those years and taken it and run off with it. So they were massively influential. I think this era of Sparks, Number One in Heaven era, was extremely influential, certainly in Britain and Europe. I don't know about in America, but other bands were popping up who had been taking notes. New Order were another one. Joy Division, who'd certainly been watching the Maels. And also Virgin gave them these other two interesting opportunities. They did this record with Adrian Munzi, Say Sheep, where they have the noises of sheep in a field over a lovely backing track played by Ron Mael. That came out, which was quite bizarre. And then they did a full-on disco album with a singer from Los Angeles named Noel, which has just been re-released in the last few months or so, and that really does sound like something that probably more disco even than Donna Summer would have been up to. So yeah.
This is interesting. He worked with Harold Faltermeyer as well on the live album Terminal Jive. Harold Faltermeyer, famous for the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack, Axel F, big hit in the 80s.
Yeah, in the 80s they kind of regroup again, and they start to become more of they work with a band called Bates Motel as a pickup band on their early 80s material. So they go back to that kind of vibe again, and there's a whole run of albums in the 80s that Sparks worked on in America, which actually didn't get released over in Britain. So we were kind of unaware of what they were doing over in America at the time, but none of this was really successful. In terms of big sales, it's only really been since the turn of, the end of the 90s that the Maels have really started to pick up and get maybe the credit they deserve, and certainly the sales have picked up. They've started to get top 10 albums back again in Britain and so on.
The resurgence of recent years is fascinating. Their popularity, they're probably more popular than ever. They're playing the Glastonbury Festival. They sell out 2 nights at Royal Albert Hall. And they wrote and produced a soundtrack for Annette. Actress Kate Blanchett was in the video for one of their songs in 2023. Yeah. What do you think has led to this resurgence for the brothers and Sparks?
It's a difficult one. It's as though the world has caught up with them. Maybe that's the case, that suddenly they're the enormous back catalogue, the nature of the Maels, that they will just keep going and doing something that's different to the norm now seems to fit better than it used to. Back in the 70s, you knew who was going to be big and who wasn't. Over in America, we'd look at bands you got like Boston and Van Halen and so on. You could see exactly why those bands were so colossally popular in the way that they were, and you could also see why guys like Ron and Russell Mael and the Sparks were not going to be as colossally popular. But I think in this more fragmented world of music that we have now, where it is difficult to be big on that sort of scale, there's more room for people like them. And they're now, they've been around a long, long time now, Ron and Russell, and it's now understood for many years now that they could play with anybody as long as there's two of them are there. It is Sparks, which is a big advantage to have, definitely. The Sparks Brothers documentary that was done has been a huge help. And you mentioned the Annette soundtrack and film as well, which is something they always wanted to do, was a film soundtrack. And they're always interesting. This is what I would say to you listeners. If you look at the next album, I've no idea what will be on the next album. I know it'll be interesting. And certainly the song titles alone are generally quite amusing and fascinating, aren't they? I'm sure you've looked at those.
Yeah, and this book gives people a great insight into those early years, right up through the end of the 70s, kind of sets up where they go into the 80s and introduce them to a bigger audience, hopefully here in the States. The book is out in the States December 20th, but in the UK, the book is out right now, Sparks 1969 to 1979, every album, every song. So we could get it at burningshed.com in the UK, through Amazon here in the US. So final thoughts on the book and Sparks. What do you think how long do you think they can keep this going? They're in their 70s now.
I don't think they will stop. I think they're amongst those people, at the very least, they could just not tour or go out and just carry on pumping out material. And I think they're finding it difficult to even think of stopping. They don't have the pressures of, say, like Bruce Springsteen or somebody's got where he is going out and doing these marathon tours. Or, in your Sammy Hagar or somebody who's out there touring. They don't have to do that. They can just do short tours, short residencies and get away with that. So I think they will just carry on. I could see them carrying on for another 5-10 years yet, definitely.
Yeah, I think they're in their 70s, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Of the books that I've done, and maybe it's because I've done a few now and I don't know, but I've had more interest in this book than any of the others.
Really?
Honestly, really, in terms of people, I'm doing a signing session in a couple of weeks here, and I've had people asking about when that's going to be. I've had emails asking me when the book's coming out, why it was delayed, and so on. So the fans are absolutely so partisan for this band, and it's a joy, because you want to write something that hardcore fans will get something out of that they didn't know. That's what you want to do. But you also want people who are more casual to pick it up and go, I don't know that album so well. I haven't heard that one.
That's me.
I'll give that one a go.
Yeah. A
And
lot of people here in the States. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you've certainly had an experience. I can tell having gone through those albums, and I suspect you've listened to most of the albums all the way through.
Yeah, I did. Because
I,
put together the playlist, it gives me a chance to familiarize myself with their catalog. In this instance, particularly from 70 to 79, that first album right up through the end of the 70s.
yeah, I mean, from the listener's point of view, what was your first reaction?
I don't think I took to them right away. I didn't, but again, I'm so open minded. I welcome all types of music, particularly all types of rock and roll music. So I'm very open minded when it comes to this type of thing. I enjoyed it. I kind of wondered why I never knew about this group. And again, going back to that one album that is my particular favorite, the Big Beat. I wish they kind of made more of those albums, but at the same time, I certainly enjoy listening to the body of work that they put together. I wish they would come around here. I don't even know if they do any dates around here on the East Coast in the U.S. or any U.S. states at all. I can look it up, but I
Yeah,
think they're mostly UK.
no, they do. You'd be looking at New York, Los Angeles as being somewhere they would do, definitely.
Yeah, just for a
Um,
few dates, but
yeah,
no major tours,
no, no,
like you say.
no, they don't do that. And it is interesting because when I got into them, is that Top of the Pops appearance, and I think if you could see that that appearance has been wiped, but you can see the Christmas show Top of the Pops appearance from '74. Where they do this talent big enough. And if you watch that and you imagine yourself as like 10, 11, 12, 13, and you've got this happening and that in front of you, that's what sold it to us. Listening to them and not seeing them, I can imagine how that must have been quite a lot of information to take in. They're songs you kind of might grow into more than hit you immediately, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, they grow on you over time. I mentioned the band They Might Be Giants. Kind of reminds me of They Might Be Giants, with
Mm.
a band that very quirky, but you listen to them and it's like there's something about it that makes you want to come back and come back again, and it grows on you. And
Mm.
Ron's got that funny dance now on stage. I think that's become part
Oh
of the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
this robotic dance that he does. Everybody loves that.
When they sort of came back over here, because they'd been gone for a while, they came back in 1994 with the Gratuitous Sax and Senseless Violins album. Um, and I went to see them at Wolverhampton, near where I lived in Birmingham. And I knew most of the front stalls people at that gig. And these were people I hadn't seen in many, many years.
Oh, that's great.
It was like we'd all
Yeah.
come together again. I looked around, there was people I'd been to school with that I hadn't seen. And there we were, and every kind of song they did, it was like someone scoring a goal or something.
Yeah. Oh, I remember this one. Yeah. That's
It's
cool.
like whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, and yeah, so always a hugely entertaining band, Sparks, and It's interesting because I suspect it will take hold of you somewhere along the way. You'll be out somewhere doing something at a football game or something, and these songs will start to pop into your head. That's what I
Absolutely.
think will happen.
Chris Sutton, thanks again for coming back on. This is visit number 5. We look forward to visit number 6. Where can people find you online? Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and I'm linked to you, so that's an easy way. If anybody wants to email me, feel free to pass my email on, Eric. If they contact you, that's great. Um, One of the joys I had doing the book was I spoke to James Lowe, and it was kind of like a support group in a way, the two of us, because I confessed to him and I went out on the line and said, I've spent decades listening to one of their songs, a song called Falafali on their first album, Sparks. And Jim Mankey plays a little bass lick at the end of each kind of verse. And then at the end of the song, he plays an extended version of this bass lick that's just fabulous. And I've spent decades still listening to that song and still feeling as overjoyed as I did the first time I heard it, simply because of this guy's bass lick. And I end up interviewing James, and I tell him this, and he's just like, "Well, I'm glad I've pleased you,"
That,
and that's it. And I've gone decades loving this.
Yeah, it's amazing. You have to wonder though, maybe inside he's got to be loving. I don't know, because to me it's like when you touch that many people with your art, whether it's music or painting or whatever it is, you just so many these artists don't realize how many people their music affects them in the way it does. I was driving back from a football game last night and I just started cranking Van Halen as I often do. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, how many times can I hear these songs and still be affected the same way? It's just music is so awesome in that way.
I mean, James was great. He plays lead guitar on some of the tracks on the first two albums as well. There's a track called "No More Mr. Nice Guys," and yes, Alice Cooper did borrow that title.
Really?
Oh yeah, yeah. They actually wanted to use allegedly. We have to say allegedly, don't we? They wanted to borrow a line from a song on the second album, Woofer. I'm the girl in your head and the boy in your bed. And they wanted to use that line.
Wow, interesting. So Alex
Um,
is a fan.
yeah, he was certainly a fan. But I mean, James Mankey plays this kind of fuzz, wah, epic guitar solo on No More Mr. Nice Guys on the first album, which is fabulous. Fabulous. I think it was Cream, I think it was, who said that at times the early Sparks sounded like Marlene Dietrich and the Third Reich combined. And at the end of each album, No More Mr. Nice Guys and Whippings and Apologies, you have that as a double A-sided single, and that's an Eric Senich playlist for
There you
definite.
go. All right. Yeah, that playlist, by the way, again, people can find it in the show notes. And also in the show notes, a link to pick up the book in the US in December, but they can get it through the UK outlets, burningshed.com. And we have to also, yeah, we also have to give a shout out to Sonicbond because they have a great series, the On Track
Yeah,
series. This is part of
it
the On
is.
Track series. So, any others that you have planned for the On Track series or other series that Sonicbond has?
The two I've got that I'm working on at the moment, I'm finishing off Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio,
Okay.
just the albums that Ronnie did, and the ones with Heaven and Hell as well. And the one that is nearly finished, hugely, ridiculously ambitious one. This is breaking news for Stephen Lamb because even he doesn't know how ambitious. He's the guy at Sonicbond.
Yeah.
He's the Chic organisation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's all of the albums that Chic did for themselves and with Sister Sledge, David Bowie, Diana Ross, Johnny Mathis, Madonna, and so on and so on. And it is ludicrously ambitious because I've reviewed every song on all of those albums.
Excellent. So that means you're coming back on at least one more time, if not twice, for those books then.
It is great. I mean, I always look forward to talking to you, Eric. And I have to say, your listeners are very kind because they seem to find their way through to me. So whether it's you or they're just good at working it out, but I do get nice feedback. So that to everyone out there, thanks very much for your support.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. We will talk to you again soon. And as always, thanks for being on.
Thank you, Eric. Take care. Cheers, man.